$20.5 million. It sounds more like a salary base versus a salary cap for teams after the House settlement finally gets resolved a little bit, and teams now can share $20.5 million across their athletic departments. Paige Dauer alongside Jimmy Hyams. But what that $20.5 million sounds like, Jimmy, is more of a floor than a ceiling, because at the end of the day, if every team has $20.5 million to divvy out, I think that just brings everybody back to square one.
Well, some have the money to divvy it out and some don't. Can you believe, and I read this the other day, that Alabama had a budget of $235 million last year and lost $28 million? How do you have a $28 million deficit with a $234 million budget? Now you got $20.5 million in revenue sharing you got to dish out.
Yeah.
So even the programs that prosper, that you think are the elite of the elite, financially, this is not an easy thing to do.
No.
And even at Tennessee's budget, as Danny White told me recently, when he took over, the budget was $140 million. He said this year it's $280 million. It has doubled in the years that he's been here, and that's less than 5 years. So this is it's not like they just printing money, which some people think. Even though say, oh, you got a budget of $280 million, yeah, but a lot of that's designated for scholarships, for salaries, for facility upgrades. So it's not an easy thing to accomplish. I don't think every school is going to be able to pay $20.5 million.
Okay.
But I think your major schools will. I think everybody in the SEC will be able to.
Because I think a lot of it, too, comes from media deals.
That's right. But remember also, there are 130 some odd Division I football schools. Kent State can't do that.
Fair.
Akron can't do it.
Yeah. I guess if you go beyond just like your SECs and Big Ten. And
Can Boise State do it? I don't know.
Can Villanova do it?
Yeah. So, well, but they're not in Division I football. So
I guess if you look at it from that angle, correct.
That leads to another argument, which I can get to another
observation. Later in the show.
Yeah. But so that and along with that, you still will have collectives.
Yes.
Now, with the collectives, let's say you had a collective at Ohio State that racked in $20 million. Is their collective going to stay at that, or will the donors say, I'm going to pay directly to the athletic department. I got $1 million. I'm going to pay directly to the athletic department. Collective, you get none of that money. One reason is that when I donate to the collective keeps 10%. So it's only $900,000 going to the athlete, but if I directly give it to Ohio State, that's $1 million going to the athlete. So I think the money dispersed from the collectives is going to go down some, because the donors are going to give it directly to the schools, but they're not going to go away. So maybe that collective at Ohio State goes from $20 million to $10 million, perhaps. But so you can still dole out money through an NIL in addition to the $20.5 million in revenue sharing.
Yeah, maybe that's where I was getting with, it kind of bringing it back to square one. Because I'm like, the revenue sharing, the $20.5 million alleviates none of the stress for your donors and your NIL collectives and name, image, and likeness. And I think in that argument, it brings it back to square one, because it's not like, oh, now that we have $20.5 million to share across our athletic departments, instead of you giving us $5 million, you can maybe give us $2.5. No, they're probably still going to want the $5, because teams that can afford the $20.5 are who you're competing with. Tennessee football is not competing with the Kent State, so they're not worried that they have a $20.5 million advantage to them. They're competing with Ohio State, who also has $20.5 and can divvy that out.
And every other elite program in the SEC.
Correct, and that's who Tennessee's competing with.
That's right. So that's what they got to be worried about.
Right.
And then they got to be worried about the Clemsons and Miamis and the other elite programs and other conferences that you have. So where does that money come from? Well, we know in Tennessee's case, they're up in the ticket prices for football, so that a percentage of that goes toward the revenue sharing.
Talent fee, yeah.
The talent fee.
Is that still 10%, or did they up that?
I don't know exactly.
I thought it was like 10%, something crazy, yeah.
I'm not a huge fan of that, because not every fan, got 100,000 over there, not every fan agrees with this revenue sharing. So if you disagree with it, why should I have to contribute to it?
Well, the tickets are already expensive. Concessions are already expensive. Parking is already expensive. Travel is already expensive. And can I have 10% more?
Yeah. So now you got that situation, but that's one reason, or one method of which they're going to use to try to raise enough money in the revenue sharing for the 20.5. And by the way, know this, that in the House settlement, that $20.5 million, this is a 10-year agreement. It escalates. In 10 years, that number may be $28 million.
That's true.
I don't know what it's going to be down the road, but there's an escalator in there, so it starts at 20.5 million
Yes.
with revenue sharing. So, and then in addition to generating that revenue, which I think Tennessee can do that.
Yeah.
I mean, if your collective was bringing in, and I think Spire was bringing in close to 20 million, right? Because allegedly they paid 15 million in football.
Okay.
Okay, so if they're bringing in almost 20 million, you know that Tennessee will have the 20.5 million from their donor base to do that. How much more will they have in the coffers? Maybe Texas collective is 40 million, so they're giving out $60 million. Who knows?
All right.
I mean, Texas is rich. So is A&M.
Yep.
Both of those programs, and so is Ohio
Pockets
State.
go deep. Yeah. Yeah.
So there are a lot of them.
Oregon. Yeah.
Yeah, with Phil Knight, he could just put in whatever he wants to.
Here's one check. Yeah.
So. So that's going to be interesting to see how that goes. So one is how you generate the revenue. The other one is how do you distribute it?
And that is the $1 million question, or $20.5 million question,
Yes.
Jimmy. How do you go about sharing it in Tennessee's perspective?
I don't know if Tennessee's going to go with this, but according to the numbers, 75% of revenue generated comes from football, 15% from men's basketball. Those are the only two that are revenue producing. Women's basketball produces revenue, but they operate at a deficit. Okay.
Correct.
But they produce the most revenue of all the others. So and that number is 5% for women's basketball. And then, so now you're at 95% with those three, 5% to everybody else.
Yes.
Well, that's not going to happen because already Oklahoma, at the SEC spring meetings that we covered recently, they have got 6 segments of their population that will be subsidized, and that is football, men's and women's basketball, baseball, softball, all other sports. So that's what they're going to do. Now, they didn't say exactly what the percentages would be. So what's Tennessee going to do? Would they follow a similar model? Maybe. It's hard to ignore what they're doing in baseball and softball, right?
Well, and I think that's where you get where I mentioned like Villanova too, because it's like, yeah, maybe you think most of your payment's going to go to football, but not every school's main sport is football. That's where I think Kentucky gets a little interesting too, because I think most of those fans probably want the basketball team to be what it kind of once was. Or you go to Oklahoma where their softball team is so good. So I think that's, like you're saying, gets a little interesting.
So that brings us to, as I said, I'd get to this later.
Here we are.
The Rick Barnes or Nate Oates or the Bruce Pearls of the world are sitting there looking at Villanova, which has a lower level football program. They could give 75% to men's basketball. And how good is that going to make them look? Or St. John's, or Georgetown, or Gonzaga.
Or just go back with Duke and UNC, you know?
And you could go Duke, UNC, and Kentucky because they're more basketball schools. So, and I asked Greg Sankey, are you going to suggest that each school follow this model? He said, no, it's up to the schools to pay whatever percentage they want. We're not getting in the middle of that. Every school can do what they want.
It's probably the smartest decision, too.
So what's the SEC, what is Tennessee going to do? I don't know. I don't know if they'll go 75% to football.
Would that be the smart decision?
I think it would probably be the smart decision because it is by far the biggest revenue producer at Tennessee.
Yes.
Now, Kentucky, the numbers may be a little bit closer with basketball and football. But if you're not good in football and if you're not generating revenue in football, you hurt everybody else. Everybody else. Because the current model before the House settlement was that football and men's basketball made money and they subsidized all the other sports, the other 18 sports at Tennessee.
Yeah.
So you had to do good in football. You've got to. Or you're going to suffer financially. So I think you've got to put most of your resources into football. Men's basketball makes a lot of money. You got to put a lot of resources into that too. But you cannot ignore the history of Lady Vols basketball. You can't ignore the fact that the softball team's been to 9 College World Series and that Tony Vitello's baseball team over the last 5 years has been the best in the country. They got more wins than anybody.
Yeah.
And then what do you do with other successful programs at Tennessee? They've been really good in tennis,
Yes.
men's and women's. They've been really good in swimming and diving. They've been really good in golf.
Yeah.
So what do you do with those? Volleyball's made the Final Four, not this year, but the year before.
Rowing's been good.
Rowing's been
Track
good.
and field.
So do you take that model of 6, which Oklahoma and A&M are doing,
Yeah.
and saying, okay, this is how we're divvying it up? Maybe. The other thing is the roster management. The men's golf team at Tennessee has lost a couple of good players because they've been told your roster is not going to be, you can't have walk-ons.
Yes.
So your roster is being cut so that a really good men's golfer who's been with the program for years is now transferring to NC State because Tennessee doesn't necessarily have room for him.
we don't have a spot for you. Yeah.
So you've got some of those issues that are cropping up. This thing is a mess. It'll continue to be a mess. It will be a mess 5 years from now. We may be talking about some similar stuff. And you know what? I'll still watch it. I'll still be right there in my seat watching that football
Glued
game,
to
that
the
basketball
screen.
game. I go to tennis matches, baseball, softball. I'll still be watching it. But I don't think there's an easy settlement to this. I really don't. I know that Danny White has said, as far as some of the revenue, they need to have collective bargaining. I agree with that. I think most people agree with that. How do you get to it?
Mm-hmm.
How do you get to it? Well, okay, let's make them all employees. They don't want to be employees. They don't want to
already
be.
tried that.
All
Yeah.
right? So, and here's the thing. Well, but the NFL does it. The NBA does it. NHL. They're dealing with a singular sport.
Mm-hmm.
You're dealing with football only, or basketball only, or hockey only. In college,
And they
you've
all
got
operate very differently.
yeah, and in college you've got 40-something sports.
Yeah.
Stanford has 40-something sports. Now, can they keep all of them? I don't know. But the problem is, do you think the volleyball player is going to agree to be an employee and have their tuition taxed, where the football player is making $4 million, Carson Beck at Miami? He
Yeah.
doesn't care about his tuition being taxed.
No.
He's making all this other money. I think it's improbable to get thousands of athletes in 40-something different sports to all agree to become employees.
Right.
So how do you get to collective bargaining? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. And
Jimmy,
there are a
that's
lot
why
of-
we had you on the show. You were supposed to know.
There are a lot of people that are smarter than me out there, and some of them, by the way, are dumber, trying to make these decisions.
Yes.
Because I've seen some of the decisions
You're like,
they've
what
made.
are you talking about?
Okay, so they ain't all got a high IQ. But I just think it's going to be really hard to reach a resolution. That's why I don't think we're going to have the House settlement is settled, but it's still unsettling
Yes.
because
Yes.
you still have a lot of unanswered questions with revenue distribution, with scholarship limits. How are you going to handle all this?
I also don't think the revenue sharing, and I might just be totally like ignorance is bliss on this, and I'm not a current collegiate athlete, but $500,000 or $100,000 is pennies for football, but can stretch a really long way for teams like softball who have never operated with that kind of a surplus. So maybe while you have your one Texas Tech pitcher who can make north of $1 million, that's still through NIL, not necessarily through like this revenue sharing aspect. I don't think this necessarily means, oh, we're going to have to cut all of these sports because we can't share it as far. If I'm a track and field, like 100-meter dash runner, I'll take 10K, sure. I mean, I never even thought in college that money from the school would look like that, and the school can pay you directly, and then maybe that opens up doors for more NIL opportunities because these players are now getting paid, or maybe instead of it just being football having corporate sponsors, or TBA having corporate sponsors and it's Food City Center, maybe other stadiums get big corporate sponsors to help with revenue.
That's
Am I
true.
wrong?
If you are Texas Tech, you're probably delighted that your pitcher's getting $1 million NIL money.
Yes.
Because then you don't have to give as much
Right.
out of your revenue sharing.
Mhm.
So can Carlin Pickens strike a deal for over $1 million
She
with
a
a corporation?
Weigels, or how do you say that? I thought she had
Weigels?
I think she has a deal with them right now too.
Well, and when she first got here, she had to deal with a car wash place.
yeah.
I know that one for sure. So so depending on these athletes getting money from NIL, how much less do you have to give them from? Or the Texas Tech is a one-time deal. She's got one more year at $1 million. She's gone, and then do you have to put more money into softball after she's gone because you you cut corners because you didn't have to put as much into it
Yeah.
at that time
Mhm.
because of that one singular athlete. There's just a lot of things to deal with in this, and
Yeah, when do
I'm
you
glad
think?
I'm not in administration.
Gosh, I know. So, do you think the inevitable future for, let's say, Title IX type sports or those smaller sports, is it inevitable that they're going to just get cut entirely and not just limited rosters?
Yes, a lot of those sports are going to get cut
When
entirely
when do you think that's going to start happening?
soon. I think this
Soon
year.
is so ambiguous.
This year.
This year.
Oh yeah, this year.
Okay. What do you think is the first to go?
Probably the sports that don't attract any revenue. So now the SEC, that was one of the topics that came up during the meetings, was they're efforting to not cut any sports in the SEC, which maybe they can afford to do.
Yeah.
But I guarantee you, there's sports in the Big 12, maybe the ACC or some other conferences that are not as prosperous, they're going to cut. So here's
Can I
what
be
you
off the wall for a second? Does these mega conferences that are from the East Coast to the West Coast, is this revenue sharing hurt those teams exponentially because so much of their budget is now travel? And then they really can't afford to have these other sports because they spend so much on travel?
It does hurt a lot. So you got a volleyball team from UCLA that's playing the volleyball team at Rutgers.
Yeah. What?
Here's been a suggestion. Rather than have all this travel stuff go on, you have 3 tournaments a year, one in California, one in Indianapolis, and one in New Jersey, and all your volleyball teams show up and you play multiple matches over the weekend.
I mean, that's what the minor leagues do. I mean, they'll play 6-game series just so they can cut
Yep.
back costs. I mean, sometimes you'll have to do weird things
So
like that.
volleyball, you can do it. You can do it in golf matches.
I mean, it's kind of how
You
softball
can do it-
starts. That's how their season starts with all these tournaments.
Yeah, you can do it in tennis.
Mm-hmm.
It'd be harder in softball, probably, to do
Basketball
that.
starts that, like in the Bahamas.
Yeah. So I think that there's
Yeah.
an opportunity around, but I do think the travel issue becomes a greater concern
Mm-hmm.
when
So maybe
you,
the sports being cut happens to those conferences first.
well, and so what do you
logistically.
cut? Okay, I love golf. Nobody goes to golf matches.
Yeah.
Okay, so is golf going to get cut? You don't have
Maybe you just need to be their super fan to
So-
start a new trend.
Yeah.
They're waiting on you, Jimmy.
So- swimming and diving. That's one.
Mm-hmm.
But here's the thing too. Title IX doesn't necessarily cover revenue sharing. Okay,
No,
it
right.
covers opportunities.
Correct.
So if you start cutting sports, you're going to cut the men's sports first,
Mm-hmm.
not the women's sports.
Well, yeah.
So you may cut men's golf and not women's golf. You may cut men's tennis, not women's tennis.
Yeah.
So you may have some of that going on. But it's going to happen. And it's going to happen to a lot of the programs that are not fiscally able to take care of this. That's one of the, quote, unintended consequences that you're
Yes.
seeing with this House settlement and with the revenue sharing. So I'm not opposed to college athletes making money.
Correct.
I'm opposed to the system that we have right now.
Mm.
That's what I don't like. I don't care for the way it's being done, and I wish you had some type of a salary cap to get this under wraps, because you are creating a system in which you're going to have to cut opportunities for tennis players, for golfers, for swimmers, for rowers, maybe even other sports. I don't
Yeah.
like that part of it, and that's going to happen this year.
Gosh.
This year.
Well, then we're going to have to meet back up in a month or two and see what's going on with Tennessee after this House settlement.
And I'm not saying Tennessee. Okay, I'm not saying
But we'll see how
anybody
the
in
dust
SEC.
settles with them when it comes to how they share the revenue and what latest updates
Yeah,
are.
yeah, but
Not because
it'll-
Tennessee cuts all sports except
Yeah.
football.
But it's going to happen, and maybe nobody in the SEC has to cut sports.
Yeah.
But
Maybe
I'm
they can
telling
survive
you,
for 5 years or
think
so.
of all the universities out there, though.
Yeah.
You know, there are 340 plus that play Division I basketball. I guarantee you, a bunch of those schools are going to have to cut some of the non-revenue sports,
Yeah, I think so too.
unfortunately.
Yeah. All right. Well, we'll be back later this week for more on things happening at Tennessee, and who knows what will be happening by the time this show gets out on YouTube. But we'll talk to you guys later this week.